Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are just waiting on the other platform to kick in live here. And once we have it, we are good to go. Look at that. All right, folks, we'll get started in just a moment. I'm just going to change our background here. We just finished on the other show. And of course, we don't want to see all of these. We're just straightening the loop through the channel there, and it's all good. So we will just make that change. So we've got the right identifier up behind us, but we're going to be talking about the ostrich farm tonight. And of course, in that regard, we will look at it from a devil's advocate's view. As you know, I've been reporting a lot of the facts from the various sources, and all of the facts that have been reported thus far. I get a lot of hate mail and threats and everything else, which is just fine. I really couldn't be bothered by that, for the simple fact that all of the information and details that I've reported thus far are backed by evidence, whether that is the Supreme Court documents and affidavit signed by the Ostrich Farm, or other sources that are verifiable and confirmed that it's very clear that my reports are evidence-based. Now, tonight I'm going to play the devil's advocate. We are going to talk about the case for saving the ostrich farm in terms of the flock and the animals. This is something that I do believe that we need to look at, because of the fact that regardless of the information and misinformation that is circulating online, regardless of the nasty profanity-filled emails and threats that I get, that doesn't matter when at the end of the day, regardless as to the owners, regardless of the case, regardless of the policies, the question really lies as to what should happen with these ostriches. And that is an important question. Let's take a look first at the legacy under siege. And again, I'll play the devil's advocate tonight so that I can look at it and give you a perspective from the other side. I think that's an important balance. Now, in the remote Kootenay region here in British Columbia, it's the location of the Universal Ostrich Farm, an enterprise that for over 3 decades has represented the life's work of its owners. That's Karen Esperson and Dave Belinsky. Now, if I refer to Dave or Karen, then you know who I'm talking about, as well as Karen's daughter, Katie. So it's not a story, though, of an industrial agriculture, but of a family's devotion to a unique herd of up to 500 ostriches, animals they have raised, bred, and cared for over a generation. The farm's own narrative poses a question that strikes to the heart of the conflict. What would you do after 30 years of raising and caring for animals on your farm? The government suddenly showed up and ordered you to slaughter them. This question has become a stark reality, and it really pinpoints back to December the 31st of 2024. That was when the Canadian Food Inspection Agency issued a notice to dispose, and that's a bureaucratic order that threatens to extinguish not only a herd of animals, but the family's legacy. Now, the conflict that has since unfolded in the small community of Edgemont is far more than a simple regulatory dispute over animal health. It has become a powerful symbolic battle, resonating with widespread post-pandemic anxieties about the scope of government authority and the protection of individual and property rights. The case has attracted international attention, drawing in American political figures and supporters who see the farm's plight as analogous to the Freedom Convoy movement, framing it as a stand against perceived government overreach. The broader context is crucial. The CFIA is not merely contending with one farmer's appeal, but it's facing a potent ideology that views its actions with deep suspicion. The agency's reliance on purely scientific and economic justifications, while standard procedure, appears inadequate and tone-deaf in a public sphere charged with distrust of institutional authority. Consequently, the CFIA's orders are perceived not as necessary to a public health measure, but as an unjust imposition by an inflexible state. So again, that is where we are going with this. If you have comments, ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to add them into the chat box. I will be checking the chats here, both on YouTube and on Facebook. I'll be jumping back and forth, checking them. So again, if you have any comments, you are more than welcome to add them to the conversation. You can also call in. The number is in the description of tonight's chat, so you can call into the studio live as well if you want to be on the show. Now, let's take a look at how this has been going on and what's going on from there. Let's continue with that. Now, the farm's narrative effectively leverages its isolation in this beautiful Kootenays region to cultivate an image of a harmless, idyllic operation. Sorry about that. Now, they want you to see it as far removed from the dense agriculture zones where disease can spread rapidly. This very remoteness, however, presents a paradox. It likely contributed to the initial biosecurity challenges and delayed official intervention, which was only prompted by an anonymous tip after dozens of ostriches had already perished. Yet, from a devil's advocate position, this geographic isolation is a compelling argument for preservation, not destruction. A contained flock in a remote area presents a fundamentally lower risk of transmission than an infected poultry barn in the Fraser Valley, for say. Now, the CFIA's failure to incorporate this specific geographical context is its risk assessment representing a significant oversight. Applying a one-size-fits-all protocol to a unique situation, the agency's order treats these animals, individuals with names like Lulu, Q-Tip, and Precious, as mere agricultural commodities, ignoring their distinct value and the singular circumstance of this case. Now, when we talk about it, the survivors of Edgewood and how it could be a living laboratory for immunity. The CFI's case for depopulation is predicated on an outbreak that began in December of 2024 when flu-like symptoms appeared in the Universal Ostrich Farm's flock following exposure to wild ducks. Over a 36-day period, 69 of the farm's 468 birds died. A mortality rate of approximately 15%. While any loss is tragic, the critical and often overlooked fact is that nearly 400 ostriches, or 85% of the flock, survived the infection. Now, these animals are reportedly healthy and asymptomatic, representing a unique cohort of natural survivors. This reality forms the foundation of the farm's central argument. The surviving birds have likely developed a herd immunity and now constitute an invaluable scientific asset for studying natural resistance to highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI. The farm has even observed that the illness primarily affected younger birds that arrived after 2020, suggesting that older ostriches with prior exposure to a 2020 bacterial infection may have possessed a more robust and adaptable immune system and immune response. Excuse me. Now, despite this extraordinary outcome, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Now, despite that outcome, though, of course, we are looking at a CFIA, in terms of their entire legal and scientific justification for the cull, resting on an alarmingly narrow evidence base. Positive PCR tests from 2 deceased birds, and a move that defies scientific curiosity and procedural fairness. None of the 400 living, healthy survivors have ever been tested by the agency. This has led the farm owners to rightly claim that their animals are guilty by association, condemned, not for their own proven state of disease, but for the fate of their fallen flock mates. This situation reveals a deeply perverse and incentive-embedded theory within the CFIA's stamping out policy. The policy, which mandates the destruction of all birds on an infected premises regardless of individual health, treats a flock with an 85% survival rate identically to one with 100% mortality. Such a rigid approach actively punishes resilience. It offers no incentive for farmers to develop hardier breeds or for scientists to study the mechanisms of naturally acquired immunity. By ordering the destruction of the very animals that could provide crucial data on how to survive HPAI, the CFIA is championing a protocol where the only acceptable outcome of an outbreak is a total annihilation, either by the virus or by the government. This is a fundamentally anti-scientific and anti-innovative stance that prioritizes the simplicity of a uniform procedure over the potential for breakthrough. The agency's refusal to test the living birds means its argument about the ongoing risk they pose is based entirely on assumption, not on empirical evidence by the population in question. In the face of a unique scientific opportunity, the burden of proof should shift. The CFIA should be required to demonstrate that the living birds are an active threat rather than the farm being forced to prove that they are not. A task made impossible when the agency itself controls the property and prohibits any independent testing. Very fair argument, I would say. Now let's take a look at this scientific imperative, the genetic value and antibody research. The argument to preserve the Universal Ostrich Farm's flock transcends the immediate circumstances of the outbreak. It is rooted in the herd's unique scientific and genetic value, cultivated over 30 years of dedicated breeding. This value is most clearly demonstrated through the farm's collaboration with Dr. Tsukamoto, a veterinary professor and the president of Kyoto Prefectural University in Japan. He is so renowned for his work that he is known as Dr. Ostrich. The research partnership focuses on a pioneering field, extracting powerful antibodies from ostrich eggs to develop novel diagnostics and treatments for a range of infectious diseases, including H5N1 and COVID-19. Dr. Tsukamoto himself has underscored the gravity of this situation with a stark warning. He is quoted as saying that these ostriches represent more than livestock. They're living research subjects that could hold the key to understanding avian influenza. Destroying them would be a scientific tragedy. The farm has pointed to prior successes, such as studies conducted in 2021 with the Quebec-based company Immune Biosolutions, which allegedly proved their ostrich antibodies were effective in neutralizing COVID-19 variants. This ongoing research is not merely an academic exercise, it has significant commercial implications. The farm's owners have stated in court documents that the antibody research could generate millions of dollars in annual revenue, and more pressingly, that the destruction of the flock would leave them liable for $620,000 worth of antigens provided by their Japanese research partner. The 30-year breeding history of the flock has created an irreplaceable genetic stock, a form of living natural capital whose value is not captured in standard agricultural assessments. In a broader economic context, where Canada is beginning to recognize that its biodiversity and natural assets are a source of immense and undervalued economic potential, the destruction of such a valued and unique genetic resource is profoundly short-sighted. The conflict has also been framed by the farm and its supporters as a struggle between independent science and the interests of large pharmaceutical corporations. The farm's research into natural solutions for viral threats is positioned as a challenge to the big pharma preference for mRNA-based technologies. While this narrative may verge on conspiratorial, it is a powerful mobilizing tool that recasts this dispute as a David versus Goliath struggle, pitting small-scale, innovative research against monolithic corporate government apparatuses. The framing helps explain the passion of the farm supporters and reframes the CFIA's actions not just as bureaucratic, but as potentially motivated by a desire to suppress alternative scientific pathways. This narrative that is bolstered by critical procedural failure. The CFIA has an established process to grant exemptions from culling for animals deemed scientifically valuable. The agency claims the farm failed to provide the necessary evidence to qualify for such an exemption. This is in direct contradiction to the farm's extensive and public claims about its international research collaboration. The disconnect suggests a fundamental breakdown in communication, or more troubling, a willful disregard by the CFIA. The agency's definition of evidence is likely confined to narrow bureaucratic criteria, such as formal peer-reviewed publications and university ethics board approvals, which may not be applicable to the more nascent, commercially oriented research and development underway at the farm. The CFIA's dismissal of the farm and their claims as unsubstantiated appears to be an act of administrative gatekeeping rather than a genuine scientific assessment, revealing an inability to adapt its processes to recognize innovation that does not fit neatly within a traditional academic framework. Don't forget, folks, that you can call in. The phone number is in the description box below your screen. You can also join by hitting the chat room. You can always hit the live chat and speak as well, so feel free. But let's continue on to looking at a question of proportionality and deconstructing the CFIA's justification. A rigorous analysis of the CFIA's justification for the cull order reveals a series of disproportionate actions based on flawed premises and the misapplication of a rigid one-size-fits-all policy. The agency's case fails to withstand scrutiny when measured against the unique biological, geographical, and scientific context of the Universal Ostrich Farm. The CFIA's primary justification is its adherence to the stamping out policy, an international standard from the World Health Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health, or WOAH, that requires the depopulation of an entire flock upon the detection of H5N1. The policy, it was developed primarily for densely packed commercial operations involving chickens and turkeys, where a virus can spread with devastatingly fast speeds and totality. To apply the same blunt instrument to a herd of free-roaming ratites is a fundamental category error. Ostriches are biologically distinct from conventional poultry, a fact recognized even within British Columbia's own regulations, which classify them separately as exotic animals under the Farm Practices Protection Act. And that is also known as the Right to Farm. Now, their physiology, immune systems, and farming conditions are vastly different, demanding a more nuanced approach than a policy designed for battery cages of chickens. Seems reasonable to me. Now, let's take a critique of the risk assessment. The CFIA has amplified its risk assessment by claiming the ostriches harbor a novel reassortment of the H5N1 virus, a unique strain not previously seen in Canada that is both highly pathogenic in lab mice and genetically linked to a human case in Ohio. While this finding sounds alarming, it must be viewed through the lens of the flock's 85% survival rate. The fact that the overwhelming majority of these birds survived an infection with a supposedly hyperlethal strain does not make them more dangerous. In fact, it could be argued that it makes them more scientifically priceless. They are a living testament to natural resilience against a novel pathogenic threat. The CFIA's argument focuses exclusively on the potential risk of the virus while completely ignoring the proven resilience of the host. The risk of viral spread from a single, isolated, and already quarantined farm is minimal compared to the monumental scientific loss that would result from their destruction. Now let's take a look at the critique of the economic justification. The agency frequently invokes the need to protect Canada's $6.8 billion domestic poultry industry and the $1.75 billion in annual exports. This argument positions the 400 ostriches in Edgewood as a singular threat holding the entire national economy hostage. It's a gross overstatement and a strategic misrepresentation. British Columbia's poultry sector, and indeed Canada's as a whole, is already subject to various export restrictions due to the widespread and ongoing presence of HPAI in wild bird populations and numerous outbreaks in commercial flocks. Millions of domestic birds have been culled across the country in recent years. The idea that sparing this one unique, contained, and monitored flock is the primary impediment to reopening the international markets is not credible. International trading partners are far more concerned, allegedly, with the robustness of Canada's overall surveillance, biosecurity, and transparent reporting systems than with the fate of one small, atypical farm. The economic arguments appear to be a red herring, used to manufacture a sense of national emergency that justifies the extreme and irreversible act of a mass cull. Let's take a look at the critique of the procedural flaws now. And the most glaring weakness in the CFIA's case is procedural. As has been established, the entire depopulation order for 400 living animals is based on tests conducted on 2 dead birds. The agency's steadfast refusal to test the survivors, citing a policy that a cull must be enacted within 48 to 72 hours of an order, is patently absurd given the months of legal delays that have already occurred. The policy is no longer a guideline for swift action, but a shield against the gathering of new relevant data that could undermine the original order. This flawed logic has been calcified by lower court rulings, which have found that the current health of the flock is legally immaterial, and that only its health status in December of 2024 is relevant to the validity of the order. This is legalistic absurdity that willfully ignores the evolving biological reality that elevates bureaucratic process over scientific fact. The fundamental disconnect between the farm's position and the CFIA's rigid stance is basically summarized below. And here it is. I just realized I can't show that on the screen, or I would. My apologies, folks. So it won't be displayed below, but I'll describe here. So the status of the surviving flock. Okay, the farm's position is that 85% of the flock survived the outbreak and are now healthy, asymptomatic, and possess herd immunity. They are a unique cohort of survivors. Whereas the CFIA's position is that the healthy-looking birds can still be asymptomatic carriers, shedding the virus and posing a risk of creating new mutations and spreading the disease. Okay, now the other issue is scientific value. The ostrich farm claims that the flock is a priceless living laboratory for studying natural immunity to HPAI, and in addition is part of groundbreaking antibody research with international partners. The CFIA's claim on that is the farm has failed to provide sufficient evidence of scientific research and its facilities are unsuitable for controlled trials. The risk outweighs any proven scientific benefit. Now, the basis for the cull order. According to the farm, the order is based on tests from only 2 dead birds. The 400 living survivors have never been tested and are being found guilty by association. Again, by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the positive HPAI tests on the premises triggered a mandatory non-discretionary stamping out policy. The presence of the virus on the farm was confirmed. Now, testing of the survivors. Of course, the farm and supporters are demanding comprehensive testing of the living birds to determine the current state of health and the status, also whether they are shedding the virus. Policy from the CFIA. Policy does not allow for post-detection testing to exclude individual birds. The entire premises is considered infected, making further tests on survivors irrelevant. Now, appropriate policy. The farm's stand on that is that the stomping out policy is designed for commercial poultry and is inappropriate for a unique free roaming herd of rat types. A flexible approach like quarantine and study is needed. Meanwhile, the CFIA's response or stand on that point is the stamping out policy is a mandatory international standard required to protect public health, animal health, and Canada's 1.75 billion in poultry exports. Now, let's go to the source of the problem. According to the farm, a tragic but natural outbreak from wild birds, which the flock has now overcome, presenting a unique opportunity for learning. The stand of the CFIA, meanwhile, is claiming that a biosecurity failure at the farm that allowed the introduction of a novel, highly pathogenic H5N1 strain, creating an ongoing risk to Canada's animal and health safety. So that is where we're at there. Now, let's take a look at the human cost of this inflexibility. The standoff at the Universal Ostrich Farm has extracted a heavy toll, not just on the owners and their animals, but on a fabric of a small community in Edgewood. With only 235 human residents, the town has been thrust into a national spotlight, its population swelled by protesters and social harmony fractured by the controversy. While the farm has garnered passionate support, it has also created deep divisions, with some longtime residents expressing fear for their health and safety and quietly supporting the CFIA's cull order. The farm has become a protest site, leading to multiple arrests, including those of the owners themselves and social media activists who have breached the quarantine line. Now, the situation has tragically escalated beyond peaceful protest. The CFIA employees and their families have been subjected to disturbing threats and intimidation, and I know I have as well. Now, local businesses suspected of collaborating with the agency have been harassed, and in most shocking incident, Lois Wood, a 72-year-old woman who lives next to the farm, was physically assaulted and had gasoline poured on her and her home. While such acts of violence are unequivocally condemnable, they must be understood as a symptom of the extreme desperation and anger that has been allowed to fester. The CFIA's enforcement-heavy approach, arriving with RCMP escorts, serving search warrants, and seizing control of the property, combined with its categorical refusal to test the living animals or engage in a dialogue about alternatives, created an information vacuum and a powerful sense of persecution. The environment proved to be fertile ground for misinformation and attracting extremist elements, transforming a regulatory dispute into a volatile and dangerous siege. The agency's tactics were not merely ineffective, they were counterproductive, helping to manufacture the very crisis of public order that they ostensibly trying to contain. Now, the farm's own vulnerabilities have also been laid bare. The owners, Dave Blinsky and Karen Esperson, face significant financial distress, including over $250,000 in debts and multiple lawsuits from creditors that predate the avian flu outbreak. While opponents may use these debts to portray the owners as grifters, the timeline suggests a small business that was already struggling, with the owners themselves citing the economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The subsequent legal battle against the CFIA has incurred staggering costs, estimated at over $500,000, which would be crippling for any small enterprise. In this context, the public fundraising campaign, which has raised a very large amount, appears less, though, of a grift and more of a testament to the public's belief in their cause in a desperate attempt to cover catastrophic new expenses. Similarly, the farm's alleged biosecurity lapses, such as the failure to immediately report the initial illness and to properly control access to the flock, needs to be contextualized. These are the mistakes of a small remote farm under immense pressure, but not a malicious act of an industrial polluter. They are precisely the kinds of issues that a properly managed quarantine and collaborative approach with federal experts could rectify, rather than using them as a pretext for total destruction. We need to look at a path forward and a proposal for science and not for slaughter. The current impasse, a choice between total destruction and continued legal warfare, is a false dichotomy. born of regulatory inflexibility. The constructive science-based alternative exists that can address legitimate biosecurity concerns while preserving the immense scientific value of the Universal Ostrich Farm flock. This path forward moves beyond critique to a concrete solution, drawing an established principle of disease management while adopting them to this unique case. While alternatives like mass vaccination or antiviral chemotherapy have been discussed in scientific literature, they come with their own challenges, including the potential for creating drug-resistant viral strains or interference with disease surveillance. Therefore, the most appropriate solution for the Universal Ostrich Farm flock is a long-term, federally funded, and independently monitored research quarantine. This proposal directly addresses the CFIA's core concerns while achieving the farm's goal of preserving and studying. The key components could include comprehensive diagnostic testing. The immediate first step must be the comprehensive testing of all surviving birds for the HPAI. This would establish a definitive baseline of their current health status, determine whether they are actively shedding the virus, and provide the empirical data that has been conspicuously absent from this entire affair. In terms of biosecurity fortification, the farm would be transformed into a secure biocontainment facility. With federal funding and CFIA oversight, its biosecurity protocols would be upgraded to the highest national standards, addressing the agency's legitimate concerns about the site's previous suitability for research. This would involve implementing strict access controls, decontamination procedures, and wildlife deterrence as outlined in established national and provincial biosecurity guides. Point 3, the facilitated scientific research. Under strict biocontainment protocols, Dr. Tsukamoto and other credible independent scientists would be granted access to the flock. This would allow for the continuation of the vital antibody research and would turn the site into a hub of innovation. In terms of the longitudinal immunity study, the flock would serve as a living cohort to study the duration and robustness of naturally acquired immunity to HPAI in ratites. This would directly address the gaps in the available science. This, of course, is what the CFIA itself has acknowledged in court documents, turning a point of uncertainty into an opportunity for knowledge creation. This approach represents a more sophisticated application of the precautionary principle, which is often invoked to justify drastic measures like culling in the face of scientific uncertainty. The CFIA has used a crude interpretation of this principle, arguing that because the risks are not fully known, the most extreme preventative action, destruction, is warranted. A more enlightened application of precaution, however, would argue that because the situation is uncertain and the potential scientific rewards are immense, the most responsible action is to contain the potential risk securely while studying it intensively. The CFIA has chosen the path of irreversible ignorance over managed risk. The case provides a critical opportunity for regulatory modernization. A successful research quarantine at the Universal Ostrich Farm could serve as a pilot project for developing new, more flexible scientific value or unique flock designation within the Health of Animals Act. This would create a formal, predictable pathway for future cases that do not fit in the conventional commercial poultry model, turning a confrontational crisis into a collaborative opportunity for policy innovation. This could work as an international study and precedent as well. But now we take a look, folks, at the choice between precedent and progress. The fate of 400 surviving ostriches at the Universal Ostrich Farm has become a referendum on Canada's approach to science, agriculture, and regulation. The central argument of this analysis is that the Universal, I don't know why I keep saying United, but the Universal Ostrich Farm flock is not a liability to be summarily eliminated, but a unique national asset that must be preserved and studied. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency's order to cull these animals is based on an inflexible application of a policy ill-suited to the situation, a disproportionate risk assessment that ignores overwhelming evidence of the flock's resilience and steadfast refusal to gather the most crucial evidence of all, the current health and the status of the living birds. The choice facing the Supreme Court of Canada and the nation is not a simple one. It's not one of risk versus safety. It's a more profound choice between bureaucratic inertia and scientific progress. To proceed with the cull would be to prioritize procedural simplicity over a priceless opportunity to advance our understanding of a global pathogenic threat. It would signal that Canada's regulatory framework is incapable of adapting to unique circumstances, preferring to destroy anomalies rather than learn from them. It would reinforce a system that perversely punishes the very biological resilience we should be seeking to cultivate in our agricultural systems. Conversely, to embrace the alternative of a research quarantine would be a rational, forward-thinking decision. It would demonstrate a commitment to evidence-based policy, acknowledging that new facts require new approaches. It would preserve an irreplaceable genetic resource and facilitate potentially groundbreaking research. Most importantly, it would set a new positive precedent for how Canada can judiciously balance public health, economic interests, and scientific innovation in the complex landscape of the 21st century. The world is watching this case. The decision will send a clear signal about whether Canada is a nation that bulldozes scientific opportunity in the name of outdated rules, or one that possesses the courage and foresight to adapt, to study, and to lead. So I hope that plays well as a devil's advocate look at the system, at the farm, and what could be done in terms of some real solutions. And again, when I talk the devil's advocate here, I'm not saying that it is an unrealistic opportunity. It really is. Again, to use it as a scientific opportunity, it's going to require a lot of work because, of course, you've got to bring it up to the biosecurity levels that would be required at this type of facility. But it could stand as a major opportunity on the world stage to also lead the way into preserving animals that have these unique characteristics or the unique experiences, such as being thrust into the H5N1 arena, so to speak, but having an 85% success rate in terms of their livelihood and their coming through it and showing no signs of infection. They are asymptomatic. Again, it doesn't confirm that they don't have it, but again, if they're asymptomatic, it's a good place to start, and I think a good reason to test them. So again, I hope that gives you some information and helps to look at it from the other side of the fence. And I appreciate you taking time to watch this live chat with James. I didn't see any messages come up, and we didn't have any phone calls come in during the live feed here on the studio line, which you can hear is a live line. So I wasn't just saying you can call in for the fun of it. But yeah, absolutely, folks. I hope that you enjoyed this one. I hope that this gives a perspective from the other side of the fence, so to speak. And I encourage you to leave your comments. And again, I've been getting a lot of threatening comments. I've been getting a lot of profanity-laced comments and a lot of insults. But hey, that's part of the life as a journalist. And again, I do hold accreditation at the international level, so I'm not just somebody sitting here chatting in front of the camera. I do have accreditation and training that goes way beyond me just sitting here and talking to you. So again, with that comes a responsibility and ethical obligations. And so, yeah, it's not that I report just out of controversy and well, you could almost say conspiracies, but again, it is just trying to bring a balanced, full approach using the available information and documentation that is available. But I hope that this report gave you a look from the other side and a clearer understanding as well, because I think that if both sides were to understand each other a bit more and to look at such things, as I said, about the opportunities to increase working together and setting a new precedent for the biocontainment partnership that could be made, it could definitely benefit the future of how H5N1 and other pathogens are dealt with, but it also could unlock the mystery of some forward thinking in terms of other pathogenics, other diseases, and viruses. So again, thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And of course, share this with others. Don't forget, I love reading your comments, so feel free to add those as well. This is the end of another live chat with James, coming to you from the ProPix TV studios in Vancouver, British Columbia. Take care, everyone, and stay safe.